It is the 4th of February, 1987. Early morning. A house in Palm Springs, California, surrounded by security. Outside the gate, hundreds of fans and journalists have been standing for days, waiting. Some of them have been there since January, since the word first got out that something was wrong. The security guards circle the property. The Palm Springs police have threatened to arrest people for vagrancy. Nobody leaves. Inside the house, a 67-year-old man is dying. His name is Laju Valentino Liberace. The world calls him Liberace. At the height of his fame, he was the highest-paid entertainer on earth. He sold out Madison Square Garden, the Hollywood Bowl, Radio City Music Hall. He set attendance records at those venues that have never been broken. More people watched his television show in 1953 and 1954 than watched I Love Lucy. He wore mink coats that cost more than most Americans earned in a year. He played pianos covered in rhinestones and mirrors under chandeliers that weighed half a ton. He put candelabras on his piano and fur on his shoulders and diamonds on every finger. And he smiled at the audience with a smile so enormous and so warm that the people in the seats felt, genuinely, that he was happy to see them specifically. He is dying this morning, and the people who work for him are on the telephone to the coroner's office, trying to get a death certificate signed without an autopsy. The cause of death they want listed is heart disease and a brain disorder. It is not heart disease and a brain disorder. His manager, Seymour Heller, has known the truth for a year and a half. He has been told not to say it. He will not say it. Instead, when journalists ask him why Liberace has lost so much weight in the last few months, why the man who once filled a rhinestone jumpsuit now looks skeletal inside it, Heller will tell them that Liberace has been on a watermelon diet. A watermelon diet. This is the story of what Seymour Heller knew, what Liberace's doctors knew, what the man himself knew, and what they all spent the last 2 years of his life working very hard to make sure the world would never find out. They almost got away with it. They did not count on the coroner of Riverside County. He was born on the 16th of May, 1919, in West Allis, Wisconsin, a suburb of Milwaukee, the third of 4 children in a household that contained in equal measure music and conflict. His father, Salvatore Liberace, had come to America from Formia, Italy, a coastal town near Naples, and was a professional musician who played French horn in bands and theaters, and eventually in the Milwaukee Philharmonic. His mother, Frances Suchowska, was Polish-American, conservative, and religious, a woman who thought music lessons were an extravagance they could not afford, and who resented the time and money her husband devoted to cultivating the children's musical gifts. The marriage was not peaceful. The biographies describe regular arguments that sometimes became physical. Into this house, on the 16th of May, 1919, Frances Liberace gave birth to twins. One of them died at birth. The surviving child weighed 13 pounds and was born with a caul, the membrane of the birth sac still covering his face, which in the Italian and Polish traditions both his parents carried, was an omen of exceptional gifts. His family called him Wally, later Walter. The name Liberace would come later still, when he understood that his surname was more distinctive than anything else he had, and that distinctiveness was going to be essential to everything he planned to do. He was playing the piano at 4. This is not a figure of speech or a family exaggeration. He could reproduce tunes he had heard accurately and with feeling before he was old enough to read music. By 7, he was enrolled at the Wisconsin College of Music. By 14, he was playing classical pieces and also, at night, secretly, ragtime and honky-tonk in the roadhouses and bars of Milwaukee, telling his parents he was playing church socials. When his parents discovered the truth, his father went to the police station to collect him after a raid. By 16, he was performing as a soloist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He was also being bullied. This is the part of his childhood that the glamour of the adult career tends to obscure. The boy who would become the most rhinestone-encrusted entertainer in American history, was, as a child, a boy who liked cooking and music and avoided sports and had a speech impediment and was, in the language of the schoolyard, different. His peers sensed the difference and did what children do with difference. They mocked it. They isolated it. They made the school day into a sustained exercise in making him understand that he did not fit. He did not fit. He knew it from very early on. He knew it not just in the way that sensitive children know they are different from the other children, but in a deeper and more specific way that he would spend his entire life managing, performing over, denying in courts of law, and carrying to his grave. He knew what he was. He decided very young and very deliberately that the world was not going to know it. The way he managed this was the costumes, the candelabras, the fur and the rhinestones, and the pianos covered in mirrors, and the smile so enormous it filled every corner of the room. He understood, with the intuition of a gifted performer who had been reading audiences since he was 4 years old, that if you give people enough spectacle, they will not look behind it. If you are extraordinary enough in what they can see, they will not think about what they cannot see. The showmanship was not vanity, it was armor. The most expensive, most elaborate, most dazzling armor ever constructed in the history of American entertainment. He moved to New York in the 1940s, changed his name to simply Liberace, began performing on the club circuit with a style he described as the mix of the classical and the popular, playing Chopin and then playing a pop song and then back to Chopin, finding the audience in the middle of the two worlds and holding them there. He was good at it. He was very good at it. The purists did not like him, called his classical playing shallow and flashy, and they were not wrong that it was flashy. But the audiences who were not purists, the women of a certain age who had always been told that classical music was not for people like them, who had been made to feel that the concert hall was a room they did not belong in, found in Liberace something they had not found before. A man who played Beethoven like he was delighted to be playing it, who made them feel that the music was theirs too. In 1950, he met Seymour Heller. Heller was 36 years old, a talent manager from Cleveland, who had spent his career in the big band era, managing Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller and the orchestras of the 1940s. He saw Liberace perform, and he understood immediately what he was looking at. Not just a talented pianist, a star, a specific and unrepeatable combination of gifts that, managed correctly, could go everywhere. They shook hands, and they did not stop working together for 37 years. Heller built the career with the methodical intelligence of a man who understood every level of the entertainment industry. He negotiated the residency deals with the Las Vegas hotels that would make Liberace a fixture of the Strip for 30 years. He structured the television deals that put Liberace's face on screens across America in 1952 and 1953. He managed the relationships with the press with a care and a ferocity that anyone who watched him work recognized as something more than professional competence. It was protectiveness. Heller was protective of Liberace in the way that people are protective of something they value above almost everything else. What he was most protective of was the secret. In 1956, a British columnist named William Connor, who wrote under the pen name Cassandra for the Daily Mirror, published a piece about Liberace that described him as, among other things, a fruit-flavored heap of mother love. The column did not use the word homosexual directly. It did not need to. The word fruit was American slang that everyone in show business understood. The implication was clear. Liberace sued. In June of 1959, in a London courtroom, Liberace stood up and swore under oath that he had never in his life engaged in homosexual acts and was against the practice entirely. He said it clearly. He said it without hesitation. He looked the jury in the eye and he said the thing that was not true as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. The jury believed him. He was awarded £8,000. The the largest libel settlement in British legal history at that point. He sent a telegram to the newspaper that read, "I cried all the way to the bank." He was lying in that courtroom. He knew it. Seymour Heller knew it. The lawyers who prepared his case knew it. The journalists who covered the trial suspected it. And the record of his private life, which has been documented carefully in the decades since his death, makes absolutely clear that what he said under oath in London in 1959 was a lie from the first word to the last. He won the case. He kept the secret. And the secret that had been worth £8,000 in 1959 would eventually cost much more than that. In 1977, a 17-year-old named Scott Thorson came to see Liberace perform in Las Vegas. After the show, Thorson was brought backstage. He was a young man from Wisconsin, blonde and slight, with a quality of appealing vulnerability that the 58-year-old Liberace responded to immediately. They talked for a long time. And then, over the weeks that followed, the relationship developed into something that Thorson has described in his memoir and in many interviews over the years as genuinely loving on both sides. Whatever else it was or was not, it was real. Liberace called Thorson his companion, his driver, his assistant. He bought him cars and furs and jewelry. He suggested that Thorson have plastic surgery to make himself look more like a younger version of Liberace. A request that tells you something specific about what Liberace was looking for in the relationship, the particular way in which the performance and the private life had become difficult to separate. Thorson agreed to the surgery. He had the chin implant and the nose job, and he looked, when it was done, in photographs of the two of them together, startlingly like a younger Liberace. This lasted 5 years. In 1982, it ended badly. Thorson was let go, fired in the language that Liberace's people used for it, and Thorson responded by filing a lawsuit. It was not just any lawsuit. It was a $113 million palimony suit, the first same-sex palimony suit ever filed in the United States, and it arrived in the newspapers like a bomb. Liberace's response was the same response he had given in London in 1959. He denied everything. In court depositions in 1984, he insisted that Thorson was never his lover. He called him a disgruntled employee. He called him a liar. He called him a gold digger. He said there had never been a sexual relationship between them. He was lying again, under oath again. The case was settled out of court in 1986. Thorson received $75,000 in cash, 3 cars, and 3 dogs. He did not get the $113 million. He got $75,000 and 3 dogs, and a silence that both sides agreed to maintain. Liberace had been diagnosed HIV positive in August of 1985, the year before the settlement. His private physician in Las Vegas had given him the news. He told Seymour Heller. He told a small number of family members and close associates. He did not seek medical treatment. He did not tell the public. He did not tell Scott Thorson, who has said in interviews that he was unaware of Liberace's condition and who has also, in those interviews, expressed the particular anger of a person who understands, in retrospect, what information they were not given during a period when that information was directly relevant to their own health. By the summer of 1986, Liberace was visibly unwell. The weight loss that is one of the hallmarks of AIDS in its advanced stages was becoming impossible to conceal. Journalists began to ask questions. Seymour Heller answered the questions the way he had been answering difficult questions about Liberace for 36 years, smoothly, definitively, without any apparent doubt, the watermelon diet. Liberace, Heller explained to anyone who asked, had become very enthusiastic about watermelon. He had been eating it constantly. The weight loss was the result of the watermelon. He was taking iron pills. He was eating 3 meals a day. Everything was fine. The journalists who heard this were not, by and large, stupid people. They understood what they were looking at. The Las Vegas Sun ran a story in January of 1987 saying explicitly that Liberace had AIDS. Heller threatened to sue. He demanded a retraction. The publisher of The Sun, Hank Greenspun, looked at the threat and the man making it and said, "We stand by our story." Liberace was hospitalized at Eisenhower Medical Center in January of 1987 for 5 days. His publicist in New York said he was suffering from pernicious anemia, emphysema, and heart disease. He was released. The media gathered outside his house in Palm Springs. The security guards circled the property. The fans kept vigil. And Liberace went home to die in the house he called Casa de Liberace, in the desert sun that he had loved since he first came to California. He died on the 4th of February 1987. It was a Wednesday morning. His doctor filed a death certificate citing cardiac arrest brought on by degenerative brain disease and emphysema. His lawyer confirmed this. His manager confirmed this. His publicist confirmed this. The machine that had been protecting the secret for 37 years was still running, still generating the official version of events, still maintaining the story that had been maintained through the London lawsuit and the Thorson lawsuit, and 2 years of visible, undeniable physical decline. Then the phone rang in the office of Raymond Carrillo. Carrillo was the coroner of Riverside County, California. He had been elected to the position in November of 1986, running on a promise to clean up the corruption in the office. He was 56 years old, described in contemporary press accounts as a portly, moon-faced businessman, and he was not the kind of man who was going to certify a death certificate over the telephone because someone important wanted him to do it quickly. His office was asked to certify the death certificate so that a burial permit could be issued. Carrillo had also received, by the morning of February 4th, a torrent of phone calls from members of the public asking what the coroner intended to do about Liberace's death. He looked at the death certificate that listed cardiac arrest and emphysema. He looked at what he knew about how the man had looked in his final months. He ordered an autopsy. The people around Liberace objected. His body was taken to Forest Lawn Mortuary. Carrillo ordered it returned to Riverside County. They said it had been embalmed. Carrillo said that did not matter. The autopsy was conducted. The results were what the results were going to be. Liberace had died of cytomegaloviral pneumonia resulting from AIDS. The coroner held a press conference. He said, "Mr. Liberace did not die of cardiac arrest and cardiac failure." He said he was certain that Liberace's doctors had known about the AIDS diagnosis for months, possibly years. He said he had ordered the autopsy because he believed someone had attempted to file a false death certificate with his office. No charges were ever filed in connection with the false death certificate. The doctor who had signed it declined to comment. The publicist moved on to other clients. Seymour Heller continued to manage other acts until his retirement. The secret was out. The question that has been asked ever since in the biographies and the documentaries and the television films and the long retrospectives about his life is why. Why did Liberace keep the secret? Why, in 1985, when he was diagnosed, did he not seek treatment? Why, in 1986, when the weight loss was visible to anyone who looked at him, did he continue to deny what was happening? Why? In the last months of his life, when AIDS was killing thousands of Americans and the country was beginning to reckon with what it was and who it was killing, did Liberace spend his remaining energy maintaining a lie about a watermelon diet? The answer is not simple. It is not one thing. Part of it was the career. He was still performing in 1986, still filling theaters, still commanding the residency fees at Las Vegas that had made him rich. The audience that loved him was, predominantly, older women who had been devoted to him for 30 years. That audience, in 1986, in the specific cultural atmosphere of the AIDS crisis, would likely have been less devoted to a Liberace who was gay and dying of AIDS than to the Liberace they had always known. He understood his audience. He had spent 40 years understanding his audience. Part of it was the lawsuit. The settlement with Scott Thorson had only been reached in 1986. Any public admission of homosexuality would have made his position in that lawsuit untenable. He had denied being gay under oath. An admission would have exposed him to consequences that went beyond the lawsuit itself. Part of it was the era. In 1985 and 1986, AIDS was not understood the way it is understood now. The fear attached to the disease was enormous and in many cases was specifically tied to the populations most associated with it. Being identified as gay and having AIDS in 1985 was not simply a medical matter. It was a cultural and social and professional catastrophe of a kind that is difficult to fully appreciate from the distance of several decades. And part of it, perhaps the most important part, was the thing that had been in place since he was a boy in West Allis, Wisconsin, being taunted on the playground for being different. The decision made very young and very deliberately that the world was not going to know who he was. That the performance would be so spectacular, so overwhelming, so absolutely dazzling, that no one would ever think to look behind it. He had maintained that decision for 50 years. He maintained it to the end. What the decision cost is harder to measure. It cost him treatment that might have extended his life, because he did not seek treatment after his diagnosis. It cost Scott Thorson information that was directly relevant to Thorson's health. It cost the people who loved him, the audience who had followed him for 30 years, the chance to understand the man they had actually been watching. And it cost the public something broader. In 1985 and 1986, AIDS was killing people in enormous numbers, and the public discourse about it was constrained by exactly the kind of fear and stigma that made it impossible for Liberace to be honest. If Liberace, who was beloved by the specific audience that most needed to understand that AIDS was not a disease of strangers, had been honest, the conversation might have been different. Other famous men who were sick and frightened and silent might have found it easier to speak. The watermelon diet might have been replaced by something real. He could not do it. 50 years of the decision was not something that reversed in the face of a terminal diagnosis. The performance did not stop because he was dying. It continued in the diminishing appearances and the publicist's statements and Seymour Heller's categorical denials until the morning of February 4th, 1987, when Raymond Carrillo picked up the phone and said no. Heller outlived him by 14 years. He died in Beverly Hills in October of 2001 at the age of 87. His obituary described him as Liberace's personal manager for 37 years, who vehemently denied that the renowned entertainer was dying of AIDS. A housekeeper who had worked for Liberace for years said of Heller, "Seymour was so honest and so sincere, and he was like a brother to Liberace. He always tried to do what was best for Liberace." Whether the watermelon diet was what was best for Liberace, the housekeeper did not say. Scott Thorson died in August of 2024 at the age of 65. He had spent the intervening decades in circumstances that were not easy, marked by legal troubles and health problems, and the specific difficulty of being known primarily as someone's former lover. He wrote his memoir in 1988. It was made into a film in 2013, starring Michael Douglas as Liberace and Matt Damon as Thorson. The film was called Behind the Candelabra. It was the first major Hollywood production to tell the real story of what had been behind the rhinestones and the fur and the smile. The museum that celebrates Liberace's life and legacy, which was located in Las Vegas, closed in 2010 due to declining revenues. The pianos and the costumes and the cars were auctioned. The things sold because the things were extraordinary, as they had always been. The diamond rings and the fur coats and the rhinestone-covered Rolls-Royce and the mirrored pianos and the candelabras that had blazed on stages from Las Vegas to London for 40 years. The secret had been kept. The secret had been revealed. The man was gone, and the things remained, as things do, available to the highest bidder, dazzling and entirely silent about everything that had happened behind them. His name was Lazio Valentino Liberace. He was born in West Allis, Wisconsin, on the 16th of May, 1919. He was the boy who was mocked for being different, and who built the most spectacular costume in the history of American entertainment to make sure no one ever looked at the difference directly. He performed for 40 years, and he was genuinely, remarkably gifted. And the audiences who loved him were not wrong to love him, because what he gave them was real. What he kept from them was also real. The coroner of Riverside County found it on a February morning in 1987, in a room no one was supposed to enter, with a procedure no one was supposed to order. He was 67 years old. The candelabra is still. The piano is dark. Good night. But I want to go back to the courtroom, because that is where everything about this story is most concentrated, most honest in its dishonesty, most clear in what it cost. June of 1959, London, the Royal Courts of Justice on the Strand. Liberace in a suit, very different from the rhinestones and the fur, deliberately, carefully ordinary in his appearance, the way a man is ordinary when he is trying to look like a different man than the one he is. The column by Cassandra had called him fruit-flavored. The implication was not subtle. Everyone in the room knew what was being alleged and what was being denied. He took the stand. He was 40 years old. He had been performing since he was a child. He had been reading rooms and understanding what a room needed from him since before he could read music. And he understood, in that courtroom in London in June of 1959, exactly what the room needed. It needed him to say it plainly, without hesitation, without qualification. He said, "I am against the practice because it offends convention and it offends society." The jury believed him. The £8,000 he was awarded were real money, the largest libel settlement in British legal history at that time. The telegram he sent to the newspaper was a joke, and the joke was funny in the particular way that Liberace's humor was always funny, which is to say it was funny and it was also something else. "I cried all the way to the bank." He was telling the truth inside the joke, which is what comedians do and what Liberace had always done with everything. There was always something real inside the performance if you looked at the right angle. He had cried, maybe not literally, but he had stood in a courtroom and said under oath that he was not what he was, and that has a cost, and the cost is felt somewhere in the body, even when the face is smiling and the telegram is funny and the check is real. 28 years later, he died of AIDS, the disease that could not be named in 1959 because it did not yet exist by that name. The disease that could not be admitted in 1985 and 1986 because admitting it would have required admitting everything that had been denied in the courtroom and in the depositions and in every interview and every press release for 50 years. The doctor who first gave him the AIDS diagnosis in August of 1985 has not spoken about what that conversation was like. We do not have that scene. What we have is what happened after it. The decision not to seek treatment, the decision to continue performing, the decision to maintain the secret through the final decline, through the weight loss that made him unrecognizable, through the hospitalizations, through the journalists camped outside the gate, through Seymour Heller and the watermelon. The decision that had been made in West Allis, Wisconsin by a boy who was different and who understood that the world did not want to know it, held for 50 years. It held through the London trial and the Thorson lawsuit and the AIDS crisis and the final months in Palm Springs. It held until Raymond Carrillo said no. I want to tell you something about Raymond Carrillo, because he is the person in this story who did the thing that nobody else would do. He was not a celebrity. He was not a journalist. He was a coroner in Riverside County, California. A man whose job was to determine the actual cause of death in cases where the actual cause of death was unclear or in dispute. When Liberace's people called his office and asked him to certify a death certificate over the telephone, he did not ask who was calling and adjust his response accordingly. He did what his job required him to do. He said the death certificate needed to be verified, and that verification required an autopsy. His staff told him the body had already been taken to Forest Lawn. He said, "Bring it back." They told him it had been embalmed. He said that did not matter. He ordered the autopsy. He held the press conference. He said what the autopsy found. He was 56 years old and he was doing his job, and in doing his job, he told the truth about a man's death in a case where every other official person involved had been working to prevent the truth from being told. He did not do it because he was brave particularly, or because he had a political agenda, or because he wanted to be the person who revealed the secret. He did it because he was the coroner, and it was his job, and the facts were the facts. The facts were the facts. That is the thing that the performance, however spectacular, could not ultimately change. The facts were the facts, and the coroner did his job, and the facts came out. I do not tell you this story to diminish Liberace. I want to be clear about that. He was a man who lived in a time and in an industry and in a culture that made it genuinely dangerous to be who he was. Homosexuality was criminalized in Britain at the time of the London trial. The stigma in America was enormous. The fear of what exposure would cost him was not paranoid or irrational. It was based on accurate observation of what happened to people who were exposed. He was also a man of extraordinary talent. The music was real. The gift was real. The thing he could do with a piano, the way he found the line between the classical and the popular and held an audience there, was genuinely exceptional, and it has not been duplicated in the decades since his death. The audiences who loved him were not fooled. They were moved. There is a difference. What was not real was the story he told about himself, the watermelon diet, the categorical denials, the telegram. All of it was performance, the most disciplined and sustained performance of his career, which is saying something about a man whose professional performances involved rhinestone-covered pianos and fur coats that cost more than houses. He performed his own life the way he performed everything, completely, without apparent effort, with a smile so large it filled every corner of the room. The smile is what I keep coming back to, because I think the smile was not entirely false. I think he was underneath the secret and the fear and the decades of calculated dishonesty, a man who genuinely loved the audience, who genuinely loved the music, who genuinely loved the moment when he walked onto a stage and the people in the seats leaned forward and the room changed. The smile was real in the way that all the best performances are real, which is to say it came from somewhere true, even if the thing it was covering was also true. He was happy to see them, and he could not tell them who he was. Those two things existed at the same time, in the same body, for 40 years. That is what it costs. That is what the secret costs, measured not in money, but in the specific tax it levies on a life. The inability to be fully present in the room that loves you, because the room that loves you does not know who you are. He was never fully present. He was always the performance. Even at the end, even as the weight left him and the disease progressed and the journalists gathered at the gate, the performance continued. Until the coroner said no. His name was Liberace. He was born in Wisconsin, and he played the piano at 4, and he was mocked for being different. And he decided that the world would not see the difference. He built the most dazzling costume in American entertainment history, and he wore it for 50 years, and he died inside it in Palm Springs on a February morning in 1987. The coroner found what was inside the costume. Now you know it too. Good night. There is one more detail, and it is the detail I think about most. Scott Thorson visited Liberace shortly before he died. They reconciled. This is documented, and it is the kind of fact that resists easy interpretation, because it could mean several things and probably means all of them at once. Thorson had filed a $113 million lawsuit against the man. Liberace had called him a liar and a gold digger in court depositions. The settlement had given Thorson 3 dogs and a fraction of what he had asked for. And then, in the last weeks of Liberace's life, Thorson came to the house in Palm Springs, and they sat together and made whatever peace was available to them. Thorson has said that he did not know about the AIDS diagnosis until after Liberace's death. If that is true, and there is no reason to doubt it, then he went to the house in Palm Springs without knowing what was killing the man he was reconciling with. He went because the relationship, whatever it had been, was real enough that the ending of it deserved to be faced rather than avoided. They had last been together as a couple in 1982, 5 years before. Thorson had been 17 when they met. Liberace had been 58. The relationship had lasted 5 years and had included plastic surgery and lawsuits and categorical denials under oath. And at the end of it, when the dying was very close, they sat in a room together in Palm Springs, and Thorson stayed. That is also part of the story. The part that is not about secrets or lawsuits or watermelon diets. The part that is simply 2 people who had loved each other in whatever imperfect and complicated way they had loved each other, finding a way to be in the same room at the end. Liberace died a few days later. He was 67 years old. He had given the world 40 years of music and spectacle, and the particular joy that only a true performer can give. The joy of watching someone do the thing they were born to do with complete and unashamed commitment. He had also given the world 37 years of a secret that his manager protected until the coroner said no. Both things are true. They were always both true. His name was Liberace. The candelabra is still. The piano is dark. Good night.